and President Sisi begins this three-leg African tour. To boost ties, the president embarks on the African tour to push economic ties and continental integration. To shed more light on the issue, we are very much delighted to be joined over the phone by Dr. Said Kholy, Professor of Economics. Dr. Kholy, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Sir, starting an African tour, the president started with visiting Angola, the first visit by an Egyptian president to Angola. How do you see this visit?
First of all, let me tell you, this visit is very important visit, not only for Egypt or the three countries the President Sisi visit, but for all African continents. United Africa is very good for each country in Africa. Remember, the COMESA is constituted of about 21 countries, which the population of this 21 countries close to half a billion population, which is considered as a major economical consumer in this region. It's almost 40% of African nations belong to COMESA, and that is considered to be an economical power. Remember, Africa, the world look for Africa as a virgin continent. Africa is filled with a lot of mineral, a lot of natural resources, and we saw in Egypt in the last few years there is a lot of involvement and a lot of improvement in using our natural resources and our raw material, and we add value to it in order to be able to export it to the rest of the world in a finished product. And this model, it will be able to continue with other African nations, with the COMESA region. We filled with a lot of natural resources, and the visit of President Sisi, it will shed light about the success of development in Egypt, and we can really share our expertise and our knowledge with our African neighbors in order to make African continent and the COMESA country a growing country in the future.
Yes, indeed. Sir, the president is starting a visit to Angola, Zambia, and Mozambique. So how do you see the choices here of these three African countries? The first time for an Egyptian president to visit Angola and I think Mozambique as well. So how do you see the choice of these three countries? And we are opening here new venues and new levels of cooperation with these countries as well.
That is the leadership of Egypt. That's President Abdel Fattah Sisi. It is not really belonging to one bloc against another bloc. We saw in the last 8 years, he visited Eastern and Western Europe. He visited many countries in Asia and in the States and in Canada. Indeed. And also in Africa. And of course, the Egyptian government and President Sisi play a major role in Arab countries. And he extended that to African nations. Let me tell you, according to President Sisi's speech last year, he mentioned a very important statement. He said stability and security for sustainable development for African nations. If we take a look at this statement, it means a lot. Remember, most of the African country, it was occupied by foreign country, like for example, the country he is visiting right now, it was occupied by Portuguese and so on. And Egypt played in the 60s a major role in order to liberate this country in Africa. Remember, we have a long history for Egyptian rule in Africa, going from the 50 and 60 and so on. And let me tell you, the first church in Ethiopia, it was built by Egyptians. The first mosque was built in many other African countries. It was from Egypt, and Egypt is really have a good chance to develop alliance with African nations in order to utilize and use their natural resources, add value to it, with the help of our expertise, our workforce, and our technology in order to enhance economical development for Egypt and many
Yes.
other continents. Remember the excess of power supply, which is Egypt now have a surplus for our energy. We can extend our exporting our energy to our neighboring country in Africa.
Sir, earlier the President Sisi was received by the Angolan President Joao Lourenço, and they are holding bilateral talks. How do you see the most important topic that would top the agenda of the talks for the two leaders?
During this visit, I am sure President Sisi will come back to Egypt with a lot of memorandum of understanding, a lot of protocol, a lot of joint venture with the country he visited, and the rest of the country will be in the COMESA summit.
Yes.
And this, it will really open the branches for investing in industry, investing in agriculture, investing in irrigation and water resources between Egypt and many African countries. I am sure this visit, it will bring a lot of good news for Egyptian economy in the very near future.
Yes.
And that is President Sisi. He doesn't go abroad until when he come back with a lot of joint venture, a lot of projects, a lot of investment from every country he visits so far.
Sir, how will President Sisi's African tour, mainly to the Southern African region, contribute to Egypt's relation with these countries and the broader economic cooperation and integration with the African countries on a larger scale?
Remember, there is a lot of challenges in Africa, African continent. Let me talk about the lack of expertise in many African nations,
Yes.
lack of infrastructure. So the focus of President Sisi is to build infrastructure for Africa, and that is Egypt. That's what we did in many Arab countries in the 60s and 70s and so on. Now
Yes.
it is the time for extending our effort for infrastructure. Infrastructure means road and tunnel. And consider Egypt in the last 8 years, it was a role model in terms of enhancing our infrastructure
Yes.
system in terms of roads, tunnels, bridges, and marine time like Suez Canal and so on. And that model, it can be really shared with our African neighborhood and with
Yes.
COMESA country. Also, in terms of education, we can have a lot of protocol, a lot of joint
Yes.
agreement in order to enhance educational system for African nations. In terms of health care, we can really play a major role of sharing our medical expertise for many African nations.
Yes.
Of course, we have this role in the last 8 years when President Sisi was the president of COMESA last year, which it will be handed over to in Lusaka in Zambia tomorrow.
Yes.
And that is a major rule. And also with irrigation and with agriculture, we can have really a good project and mega project between Egypt and many African nations in the near future.
Yes.
Of course, it's a win-win situation.
Of course.
Win-win situation. Egypt will win from this kind of protocol or joint venture,
Yeah.
and our neighbors, our African country, it will win at the same time.
Sir, what economic and trade agreements are expected to be signed during the President African tour from your point of view? And as you have kindly mentioned that still we are having some challenges here to increase the cooperation among the different African nations, how we can be working on in solving these challenges?
First of all, let me say the challenge we face in Africa, in many African nations
Yes.
right now, it's first of all, poor infrastructure. Remember, economy and trade, it means logistics. Logistics, it means you have to build the state-of-the-art roads and tunnels between a country, and Egypt working very hard in order to extend their infrastructure and road and train road and so on to many African nations.
Yeah.
So the challenge is poor infrastructure, unfavorable business environment. We don't have really a law or a comment agreement between COMESA members. We're working on that in order to have free trade agreement between COMESA members,
Yes.
which it reached almost 100% now with COMESA members. It's 100% tariff, of course.
Yes,
Free, limited technology, but we have to extend the same way we built in Egypt to build a strategic alliance with European and Asian country in order to really share the technology, and we'll be able to switch our to make value added for our mineral and for our natural resources to be final product. Another challenge is lack of skilled professionals, and Egypt can help in that to fill the gap of this kind of challenge for African nations. Low domestic demand in some countries. Remember, not all, one of the biggest countries in the COMESA is Egypt, and Egypt, for example, is a 100+ million population, and some of the countries of COMESA, their population is not that big as Egypt and many other African nations. Therefore, that is the challenge. Of course, if we overcome this challenge, if we switch the challenge to opportunity,
yes,
member,
sir,
and
I'm sorry for interruption, but now we go live to Angola, where